Hello, and welcome to lecture number 13 for Art Deco. By the beginning of the 20th century, our ability to make things had compounded upon itself so much that the pace of innovation was breathtaking. And there was an incredible optimism for the future and what we were capable of achieving because there seemed that the pace of change and society getting better, and not just that, but the average life expectancy and quality of life for even the lowest bottom echelon of people was dramatically rising decade after decade. And so there was a lot of forward thinking and positive thought about what humanity is capable of doing and achieving, and they wanted to glorify that at about the same time that the way that we make things had finished fundamentally changing. It will never finish, but the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s, which primarily began as a textile and thereby a fashion revolution and sensation, had evolved so that there was machinery making more and more and more things. So Art Deco from about 1910 to 1960. One of the things I read about it said it is sleek, but it is not minimal. The style reflected, let's see if we can go forward here. The style reflected admiration for the modernity of the machine and for the inherent design qualities of machine-made objects, relative simplicity, planarity, like having flat sides, symmetry, and unvaried repetition of elements. Derived from modern manufacturing methods featuring sleek, long lines, gentle curves, geometric patterns, and futuristic shapes and materials. So the craftsmanship of the individual worker from Art Nouveau and from all the time before that was no longer fast enough to produce buildings and goods for the huge, fast-paced world of the 20th century. Machine-stamped metal and chrome, bold synthetic colors, and daring structural engineering set the tone for a style that covered everything from recreational vehicles to government buildings, from toasters to posters. During its heyday, Art Deco represented luxury, glamour, exuberance, and faith in social and technological progress. The huge wealth of the pre-Depression United States and its commercial manufacturing wonderland was glorified by the materials and shapes of Art Deco. So all of this was built with the thought that the way that humanity's relationship with machinery was positive, and that all of this was leading to a better world. And so a lot of this was futuristic from the perspective of the time period. If you ever get a chance, check out the movie Metropolis, the first science fiction movie made in 1920, I believe. It's absolutely amazing and still referenced constantly today. Robots, all kinds of technology, really incredible. So the use of metal more than ever before, the use of old ideas like spires and towers and turrets, completely not as a revival style, but to create something that is entirely new, using the qualities of man-made materials to give direction to what those shapes and textures would be. Right in the middle of this style happened the Roaring Twenties, which I'm sure you've heard of before. The Roaring Twenties, a period of economic prosperity with a distinctive cultural edge. This period saw the large-scale development and use of automobiles, telephones, films, radio, and electrical appliances in the lives of millions. Rapid industrial growth and economic growth accelerated consumer demand and introduced significant new trends in lifestyle and culture. So this was the Jazz Age. It was a time when more and more people had more and more wealth and more free time. They had more and more ways to communicate, both in meaningful ways and in meaningful but entertainment-based ways. Times when people from broad areas were able to come together with ideas and culture and music because of the radio, because of eventually coming down the line is television. And so a new fascination with culture, with jazz, with nightlife, at the same time as a huge amount of wealth from the incredible production and manufacturing capabilities that, especially in the United States, had been developed up until this time, led to a time that was referred to as a time of incredible excess. And it was probably a lot of fun. If you ever see The Great Gatsby, it takes place during this time period. The still on the bottom left near me is from that movie. These two on the right are from from other films. These other sketches are from an artist called Henry Patrick Raleigh, and he is an incredible magazine illustrator and story illustrator from this time period. Yeah. And so you can see that the quality of life for some people, even still a small amount of people, had reached a new zenith. And they wanted to use that wealth to be in places that felt as if they had never existed in any way before, that were indicative of their new status and the way that they felt they were living in the future. Our first keyword for this is going to be architectural lighting. And architectural lighting, of course, electricity had become hugely popular and it had become widespread. And so it wasn't just being used to light interiors and for functional lighting. It began to be decorative lighting. And for the first time, they were building glass and facets of structures into the architecture itself to have lighting be a part of it. And especially in the center picture, there were many, many sconces and chandeliers and things of geometric shapes that were part of the Art Deco movement. Even the Chrysler building here on the left, which we'll talk about when we get to New York Deco, you can see that the most fundamental part of it, the triangular windows, were designed with the idea that they would be lit from within in a visible manner. Another thing that came along to be incredibly popular during Art Deco is neon. Neon, of course, is glass tubes that can be bent and shaped and filled with a gas that reacts by glowing when you electrify it. And it can be different colors. You've all seen neon, but it came out for the first time, and it very much fell into the tenets of Art Deco because it is bold, it is modern, it is incredibly saturated in color, and it's very linear, so it can be very geometric. Our next keyword for this is wraparound windows. A window that turns a corner unsupported. So there's no column in the corner of a building, which up until this time period in history would have been absolutely unheard of because you would need the corner to be the strongest place to keep the building from falling down. And the way that they started achieving these wraparound windows is because the floor and the ceiling, which would be the floor of the next floor, would be steel that would be cantilevered out from the center of the building. So you might have columns that are inset, and then the outer facade or the curtain wall of the building could be much more elaborate. It's the same way that large glass skyscrapers today work. How can the outside wall all be glass with only tiny little bits? The columns are all inset back into it a little bit, and the steel beams cantilever the floors out to a new edge. So wraparound windows were a major feature, both curved and in a 90-degree angle, perpendicular angle. Cool. So you can see clearly in these pictures how much of an effect that can have. A completely new use of curve and line in Art Deco. And that brings us to stamped metal. So the ability to machine press a design into a sheet of metal and then to make as many of those as you could possibly want is starkly different from having to carve Corinthian columns exactly the same by hand over and over and over and over and over again. From this time period going on, we see the average craftsmanship skill of the lowest level worker plummeting to simply operating a button to create something. However, we see the uniformity of things that are supposed to be uniform and the speed of producing them increase dramatically and the cost of producing them decrease dramatically. And this is something that still goes on today and is constantly a conversation in economic news and scholarship, is the relationship of jobs to production, right? So stamped metal, they could be found frequently below windows in the spandrel panel like this, or it could be in ceilings or in many, many other decorative places, even doors, lots of stuff. And there was lots of other stamped metal items. We're going to look at some of those when we get to like props and furniture. Our next keyword here is streamline. Streamline is one of the most major important concepts in Art Deco. These buildings were designed a little bit later in the Art Deco period, up into the 30s and 40s and 50s. But the idea of it is it emphasized long horizontal lines, gentle curves, and sometimes nautical elements. So vehicles were incredibly important in Art Deco because for the first time they were really, really good. And lots of people were owning cars. And if you look at some of the vehicles from this time period, they are incredibly sleek and bulbous and streamlined, and that's exactly where this word comes from. Trains from this period, very aerodynamic, and there was a lot of art and posters about vehicles and speed and how exciting it is to travel and how we can go beyond the horizon. So streamline was something that came into architecture very, very much. All these buildings are considered streamlined, and you can see those features here. Less individual, minute level decor, more an overall sleekness and aerodynamicness to the structure. All of these are considered streamlined deco buildings. Our next keyword is bakelite. For the first time in history, things could be made out of plastic on a large scale. Plastic, of course, being a petroleum product, and with all of these vehicles, we're burning a lot of petroleum products, and so there's a lot of petroleum, and there became the invention of plastic on a large scale. And so they made everything out of bakelite, which isn't just plastic, it's a super hard, very tough, and potentially vibrantly colored plastic that is still very durable, and people collect this stuff today for very high prices. But they made everything out of it. Radios, cups, jewelry, dishes, ashtrays, all kinds of stuff. Some of it is very beautiful and lovely. Some of it is incredibly garish, especially some of this, like, if you look at the middle image here, this like banana colored clock. Very, very ugly. Very interesting. Veneer. So veneer is kind of like marquetry, a word we had a long time ago where you inlay pieces of wood, very thin pieces of wood, into a cutout to get a pattern. But veneer is covering something entirely in thin pieces of wood. And the reason that you might want to do that is it would make the whole thing less expensive to make an entire cabinet or whatever out of cherry or walnut. You could make it out of pine and with a lower skilled craftsmanship. And then you could have just like the veneer experts come in and do the veneer. So it would be cheaper, but it would be much more beautiful because you could intentionally have these patterns show up. So when you butterfly something and the pattern comes together, like these two chevrons here on this furniture, or you could have the patterns be more dramatic, like the sunburst here on this cabinet. And these chevrons here, incredibly beautiful. And look at the matching panels on this center buffet or bar. Those two pieces being nearly identical mean that they were both sliced very thin next to each other from a single piece of wood and then moved apart and used together to get two pieces of wood that look exactly the same. So to achieve symmetry with something that you wouldn't normally think would be possible. Veneer is incredibly beautiful, and if you're ever out prop shopping for this stuff, it is very difficult to find it in good quality because, and this is one of the big weaknesses of Art Deco, for the first time they were mass producing things at a large scale. They had no idea what was going to happen 80 or 100 years later, and a lot of the stuff that had veneer on it has chipped and peeled to a degree that makes it very difficult to repair, especially since you can't just sand it down. It's a separate piece of wood that's glued on. So a lot of 1920s furniture and stuff from this time period is in very bad shape, and it's frequently better just to make something and paint it than it is to try to find something. Along with veneer, a lot of furniture was lacquered. Lacquer we have talked about before. It came from Japan and it became huge during this time period. There was a passion for new materials, for things to be plasticky, for things to feel futuristic and not wooden. And so lacquer is shellac made out of I think it's made out of sea shells and stuff. I'm not sure exactly which animals, but grinding up these mineral-based shells and turning them into a liquid that hardens over a surface both smoothly, incredibly glossy and smooth, and incredibly hard and impossible to stain, difficult to chip as well. So lacquer was very, very popular, and it's something that can be incredibly beautiful and also pretty cringe because it can be very, very tacky in the wrong way. Like this lighter up above my head, that's pretty lovely. Even these cabinets on the bottom, kind of lovely, interesting, look like they might be plastic or whatever. This bed or couch up here, pretty weird. Some of this stuff too. So this lacquered table has inlays of cards and squares. A lot of the stuff that you see in Art Deco comes back with a vengeance in the 80s, which is very funny because the 80s were also a decade of incredible decadence and very tacky. And so Art Deco as a style can be the most elegant and most beautiful style. And it can also be pretty tacky and trashy. And so people are very on the fence about it. If you meet someone who's like, oh, I don't like Art Deco, talk to them about it because they don't like it because a lot of it was mass produced cheaply, tackily, trying to look really nice. But a lot of stuff that was produced during the time period was really, really nice. Check out this lacquer jaguar or panther down here. Awesome. Love it. Here's some more lacquered stuff. Here's another lighter. Lovely. Here's a console table. Lovely. This whole couch ensemble is like a bit much to me, but it's very shiny, and that was important during the Art Deco period. And another super tacky thing that came back during the 80s was putting a mirror finish on everything. So very similar to veneer, they were like, if I can veneer wood, I can veneer mirror. Let's do it. Let's glue mirror onto every possible surface because nobody's going to break it. It's all just like a elegant society. So they would just put mirror on everything. Very Art Deco. This console table up here on the top right. Potentially lovely, almost immediately filthy with fingerprints and dirt and stuff. One of the tackier things about Art Deco. Another thing that they did was chrome, and the difference between mirror finish and chrome is that chrome is a plating, so you like electrify something and expose it to nickel or whatever it is, and it electroplates it and sticks to it. So it's an ultra high polish finish that can be applied to metallic objects that you can make all kinds of things off of. You've seen chrome before, you see it on household goods, you see it on cars, not so much anymore, but they used it a lot. And chrome goods could be ashtrays, they could be toasters, they could be vacuums, like this thing behind me right here, pretty cool. And chrome can be really, really lovely and like actually really, really elegant and nice. Or it could also be tacky like this like weird drink set right here in the middle. Pretty cool. So, New York Deco. So all of these specific details we just went over are just to give you some individual material insights into the broader thing, which we're going to talk about now. So in New York, the Deco became grand, austere, imperial. New York is known as the Empire State, and the biggest Art Deco building that they built was called the Empire State Building, finished in 1934. Very ornate, very elegant, but also like serious and reserved and wealthy. So New York Deco has a flavor to it that is golden, that is optimistic about the future and the future empire of humanity. Just very, very, very interesting. Did you know that that elaborate structure at the top of the Empire State Building, I have a better picture of it? No. That thing at the top of the Empire State Building, the whole situation up there, the reason there's like 12 elevators going up to a huge lobby plaza up there is not just so that tourists can go up there and check it out, though it's awesome up there. If you ever go out there, try to remember it was originally built as a transportation hub for blimp transportation. That's the coolest and most Art Deco thing in the history of the world. He's like, blimps will be coming and going night and day from the Empire State Building. We've got to get people into the skies. Anyway, they found that it was completely unworkable because it's so windy up there that sure, they could attach the front of the blimp to the thing, but the blimp would just like
blow in the wind, totally. So they never did it more than like twice, and they were like, we have to stop doing that. So the Chrysler Building is probably the most Art Deco structure in the world. Incredibly beautiful, upward, outward, celebratory, glory. Looks like a crown jewel of some empire. It's an incredibly beautiful building. We'll see a bigger picture of it later. And if you see this building, you always have to wonder, like, what is in there? What do they even do in there? You can just rent. They're expensive, but you can rent the areas in there. One of them is a dentist office. Check out this picture on the top right. This guy has his dental practice in the Chrysler Building. Fantastic. Contrast that with LA Deco. Los Angeles Deco is vibrant. It's bold. It's more exotic. It draws from more other cultures more freely. It's much more futuristic because the people who moved to America in the beginning were like, I'm getting away from European society, getting away from the old world. I want to do new stuff. And that was a certain percentage of the global population that was like, I want to move forward. And then a certain percentage of the US population wanted to leave that behind. They're like, that's not enough. I want to keep going. And the people who ended up in California early on were the people who wanted, this is a broad generalization, of course, but some of them were the people who wanted to go to the end of the world. It's as far west as you can go. Change things the most, make a new society. I'm interested in the next thing. And so there was a freedom, and there still is, a freedom and a vibrancy to Los Angeles and the architecture and the art that takes place there that really reflected in the Art Deco. If you look how, like a graphic design, this breakwater building is. Sure, we see stuff like this all the time, but we saw it first in this time period. The Eastern, I think it's the Eastern Kodak building, the most iconic LA Deco building. And it has a more exotic feel to it, kind of like Zelige or the Moorish architecture that we talked about weeks ago. Excuse me. But it's incredibly beautiful. And if you compare its like entryway and stuff that we're going to see in a second to like the entryway of the Empire State Building, there are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. So LA Deco, celebratory, more exotic, very desert, and throughout the entire Southwest, a lot of this LA style deco. I used to live in Tucson, and this too is like of a similar style. Forward looking, not forward to today, but to a possible future, and much freer and much more playful than New York Deco. So here's some more LA Deco. Geometric but playful. This building here on the bottom actually is from Tucson, and very similar, same style. Here's the Eastern building again, and here's another LA building. So you can see all of these like more exotic elements coming into it, and it's a much more relaxed deco. Whereas Miami Deco, which Miami is a city we would normally never bring up when talking about the history of architecture, but Miami Deco is, there are hundreds and hundreds of buildings of a style that is very beach-oriented. It is exuberant, very streamlined, lots of neon. It's very lighthearted and frivolous and exciting. There's enough of it. There's scholarship about it. And you can see here that it is pastel. It's light and beautiful and lovely and fun. You would not see this in New York. It would be considered tacky. But in Miami, it feels right. And it is very much related to the lifestyle that was going on there, a new kind of leisure. Yeah, so there's a lot of it, and looking at the nighttime pictures of it are almost as interesting because there's a ton of neon and interesting uses of it in relation to the color palettes of the structures. Cool. So poster art. So just like in Art Nouveau, poster art continued in Art Deco to advertise things. Lots of transportation and vehicles, lots of commercial goods, and all of them kind of like this poster. Look how the forced perspective of the train going back into the distance makes you feel like it's punching into the sky and it's going to take you somewhere new. And all of this is shiny and clean and smooth to the touch, and it's perfectly brand new, and it's totally glamorous. And manufacturing has made this possible, this better future away from the past into the bright future. So all of these things, from even just like a relaxed Australia poster up here on the top left to this movie poster for Metropolis here, all of it is all about outward and upward. Everything about this time period was with that thought, and that is good to know about. But it also it all kind of came crashing to a halt in 29 when the stock market crashed, and a lot of people who had a lot of money lost a lot. In fact, a lot of people who didn't have much lost the least. And so society sort of ground to a halt as everything got completely restarted. And Art Deco took on a turn to cheaper materials, other ways of doing things that weren't so over the top. So now we're going to talk about a few motifs that were very omnipresent throughout Art Deco. More than any other style that we're going to talk about, the motifs spring forth unexplained. Why? Why a fountain motif? It's very lovely. It's very obvious what it is. And it's a very interesting shape. And it's certainly like the outward, upward, like the shape of the Chrysler building is not that different from this fountain here on the left. However, where it came from, I'm not sure. This screen here behind me is also a prominent fan motif feature. And this building on the right even was built in the fountain motif. Here's some more fountain motif, more abstract on the left, and more specifically fountain, but look how they like ridged the fountain streams to look like water falling. Very interesting. The next motif is a fan motif. So the fan motif looks like fans used in many different ways. Here on the right, we see the elevators for the Empire State Building. Ubiquitous. The fan motif was everywhere. And you see patterns in wallpaper like this and inlays like this. And you also see lots and lots of screens like this. Metalwork cutouts. Here's some more fan motif examples. Not so different from the palmette of classical styling, but distinctively a choice was made that Art Deco doesn't really include any of that. So it was like almost like a completely new classical style that doesn't reference previous work. The next motif is the Sunburst Motif. And the Sunburst Motif is just what it claims to be, but there are many different variations. So I was talking before about this on the left is the entryway to the Eastman Building. And on the right, this thing comes from the Empire State Building. Both have a sunburst, but the very different feeling of how that is presented. Here's some more sunbursts. They could be in lots and lots of different shapes. This is a really lovely one to use in a design. And our next one is the Ziggurat motif. So the Ziggurat, if you remember all the way back to Mesopotamian architecture, is a stepped pyramid that is like a layer cake going up to the top. Well, the Ziggurat, whether inspired by that or not, came back with a passion in Art Deco. And I think that it's just a stepped geometric shape, and that's why it's so popular, because you can see there are many different variations from this sort of almost fan-like one that's kind of related to this one. So the window to the sconces here, kind of like something has been fanned out, versus the one that's on the bed here, or in this, looks like a carpet pattern of just stepping up. But the Ziggurat motif, very, very, very common. Ziggurat motifs in all of these images, whether architecturally, a stepped hanging column, whether it's just like a Minecraft block, or all of these examples of Ziggurat as well. All the same, all Ziggurat, even if they're a little different, like this stained glass sconce down here. And also there were natural motifs, which don't seem instinctually correct to Art Deco because it was all about being man-made. But some kind of relationship to Art Nouveau led to there being quite a bit of Art Nouveau or natural stuff showing up in Art Deco. And this is another place where we see potential for classical reference that was strictly avoided. So columns and column capitals, new stuff, do something different, similar but different. Owls show up a lot. I don't know if that's a reference to like Athena and Greek culture, but that was never done
in classical, so maybe they felt they could do it. But a lot of this natural stuff feels like it would be a great spot. So this is an owl as well down here, like a stylistic owl. A great spot for classical stuff, they don't do it. But they do other classical stuff. Like this is wheat in this grating up here above my head. Those are wheat plants, which is not doesn't show up in classical architecture, is a classical thing, right? Very interesting. Like some alternate future alien classical. And lots of different plant life and vinous stuff here, almost like a collaboration with Art Nouveau. These things did exist partially at the same time, and there were a lot of overlaps in them. So those are our keywords for this time period. I'll go back over them, but don't forget to get the vocabulary sheet off of the files section of Canvas. Art Deco, the Roaring Twenties, Streamline, architectural lighting, wraparound window, stamped metal, Bakelite, veneer, lacquer, a mirrored finish, chrome, New York Deco, LA Deco, and Miami Deco, all unique, poster art, and then the motifs that we talked about, fountain, fan, sunburst, ziggurat, and natural. So all of this is just to say that there's a lot more to know about Art Deco, a lot more to go into and to study, and it's all very, very fascinating. There are hundreds or maybe thousands of buildings around the world that still exist today from this time period that are unique in their own way and incredible. So I would encourage you to see this as just the barest touch of the potential to start researching some of this stuff. Thank you very much for being here with me in this lecture. If you have any questions about this time period, please let me know. We have a quiz coming up, and in a week or two, another major project, just like our last one. So feel free to reach out to me. Let's schedule a Zoom meeting if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much. I look forward to talking with you again soon.